Hello and welcome to the part two of the episode. So, in the previous part, we have experienced a journey into what a joint warfare reality is, both on paper and on ground as well. So, now we'll be taking a deep dive into more deeper dynamics of how this is executed, what kind of movements that happen in the joint commands. So, without any delay, I would like to jump directly into the topic. Shailesh, welcome back to the episode again, and
Thank
this time I'm expecting more realistic examples from your side, but of course, as I said previously, be in your comfort zone. If you feel you shouldn't name any specific entity or a weapon system, please feel free to slash it out. But yeah, you can provide answers to this kind of questions as per your perspective.
Yes,
So yeah,
definitely.
from your perspective and your experience, can you share an example without naming any specific system of a weapon with that initially looked ideal in isolation but became difficult to integrate in joint operations?
Okay, so something that looked very ideal in the beginning, or say for the Air Force perspective while planning, and but it became difficult while actually executing the mission. So I have a very interesting example for this, which I was also a part of this complicated situation. So I have a very interesting example for this, and I would like to tell you about this very particular scenario of a joint operation. So this joint operation was between what is a requirement of an army target. So this army target was a very important strategic target considered for the army. So for the corps which was fighting, this was a very important strategic target. Say for example, it was something like a storage of a very important weapon, or a supply chain of fuel weapons, or something that drastically would affect the outcome of the battle in the coming 3 4 days. So this priority was assigned, and this target was particularly importantly required to be engaged, and this engagement was had to be very precise, and that this particular center of the target had to be engaged. So when the weapon to target matching was done, this requirement to meet this requirement, a, a precision weapon, that is a laser guided bomb, was selected. So once this laser guided bomb was selected, uh, the platform that was carrying also had to additionally carry some self protection equipment, that is a jammer pod, which would protect itself in case of threats from the ground, jammer pods, additional shafts and flares, and air to air weapons on the aircraft itself, because it envisaged certain amount of levels of threats, and to counter that threat, the platform had to carry additional weapons, and it carried, say, two laser guided bombs. Now, once while executing the mission for this laser guided bomb, the laser which was to be designated would either be carried by the aircraft itself, but the platform was not permitting, because the additional protection suites, EW protection suites, and the air to air missiles which were mounted, that did not permit additional carriage of a laser designation pod. So in this case, it was clearly understood that the Army Special Forces can provide the designation of laser designation of that particular target, because if you are aware that we also have systems which are man portable, we can carry it, and laser designation through those systems, the reflection on which the aircraft can lock on and fire. This kind of systems are available, and the requirement was projected backwards by the Air Force to Army, that for engagement of this particular target, you have to send your special forces and laser designate that particular target at, say, particular coordinated timing. So once that designation is done from airborne platform, the weapon would be dropped. Now, to convince the army commander that why a army special forces was to be sent into this particular area to designate the target, he was, because of course that army commander, he understands the battlefield scenario, and he, once he was given a backwards tasking, reverse task on sending his special forces to designate that particular laser designate that target, he could not understand why a laser designation pod cannot be carried by the aircraft. because now there is no time to explain him the complete theory of threat assessment and an electronic warfare suit, jammer pods, air-to-air missiles, shafts and flares that the aircraft has to carry. It is very difficult for an army commander to be explained of why the air force is required to carry, and vice versa, the air force commander would also does not have fair idea what the how special forces of that army commander on ground are committed. Maybe they're committed elsewhere and he has to pull out from there and he has to pitch those troops in that particular tasking. So here there is a clear mismatch of decision making, understanding, and requirements. So here, this is a very peculiar scenario where exact the targeting process you have to do it, but here in to integrate that in the jointness was very difficult. So an interaction between both the commanders, discussion, slight deliberate discussion, a quick explanation of particular limitations helped in uh, actually going ahead and planning that and execution of that operation. So I hope you've got this very particular peculiar example that I faced, and it is exact example of how things are difficult in integrating joint operations.
Absolutely. And just to basically follow up on this, I mean, discussion, the kind of answer that you mentioned. So, in joint warfare, how does weapon effectiveness depend on the weapon itself versus the sensors, uh, data links, and as well as the control of the targeting process?
Okay, so a weapon accuracy of weapon, or say effectiveness of that weapon, uh, the from that weapon itself or the platform firing it or the pilot actually firing it and engaging it to vis-a-vis the sensors and data link targeting process, or the acquisition or guidance are two phases of the same process. So I would rather explain it in such a way that the weapon, once being released from the platform and engaging the target, is dependent on the accuracy of the weapon itself. But for that weapon to reach that particular release bucket, that where it has reached now, it can be released. There is high dependence on sensors, data link, the entire process which is a precursor to that web platform reaching that release point. So this integration, these are two phases. The first phase, it is totally dependent on sensors, the data link, the guidance to that platform to reach that particular point. Say, for example, an strike aircraft, say it is an F-15 or any strike aircraft which has got airborne, to be able to, after getting airborne, to be able to reach that one particular point where it has achieved its release point and it has now releasing that weapon, it would go through a process where it has to take assistance from multiple operating platforms as well as systems. Say once he's got airborne, he would require an refueling from an air to air refueler. Once he's entering the combat zone, he would require a radar cover and advanced warning system, which is say or airborne or ground based, assist him and give him an analysis on what kind of threats are developing dynamically when he's entering that enemy airspace. So he needs a real time live assessment of developing situation which would threaten him. Also, some if his target would be assigned to him through data link, his own radar, his own sensors are continuously working, and as he's going closer to his release point, he would also have his own radar warning receiver, missile approach warning systems, which would keep warning him continuously of any peculiar threat emerging for against him when he is going towards that. Say for
Yes.
example, he's going towards an target which he is engaging, which is a military target. So that military target is defended by a surface to air missile. Now that surface to air missile would have its own radar, have its search and track radar. Now when that search and track radar starts tracking or picking up that aircraft which is coming towards it to fire a weapon, it would also threaten him by start tracking him and maybe launch a weapon against him. So in this case, the sensor becomes very primary and very important, which is a particular radar warning receiver, which is giving him a real-time threat analysis and telling him. it is warning him of an imminent launch against him of a say particular SAM, or
Yes.
an interceptor has got airborne, and that interceptor is positioning to threaten him. So in this case, the ground-based radar or air-based radar, who is looking at the scenario, long-range radar, who is seeing that once you are entering the target area, there is there's another interceptor which is closing onto you, who is likely to threaten you or shoot you down. That analysis
Yes.
would warn the pilot of an incoming threat. So if he's threatened by that and if he's not aware, he would be shot down. A strike aircraft, if he's shot down by the interceptor, the mission is a complete
Yes.
fail, because that weapon has never reached its release point. So before reaching its release point, that aircraft was shot. The platform itself was shot down. So here, in this first phase, on leading on to reaching that weapon release point, was depending
Yeah.
was dependence on on a different lot of different sensors and different platforms. But once he's gone to that particular point and that weapon is to be released and fired, now lot of things depend on the weapon itself. He may have, with the assistance of all other agencies, sensors, data links, he has reached that point, but after release, that weapon misses the target. So this execution of this entire mission goes is a failure, because finally the weapon has not engaged the target, or has missed the target. Now at this very particular phase, that is the second phase, the effectiveness totally depends on the weapon, because, or say, the platform releasing it or the pilot firing it,
Yes.
or its accuracy or guidance, it totally depends on that particular weapon, because now it has to achieve its target or achieve its aim of going and engaging the target accurately. So there are these.
Yes.
I can we can To summarize, I can say is there are two distinct phases. First is first phase, where that weapon is reaching a point where it is to be released, and from release to engaging of that point, the second phase. So the dependency on the weapon itself on and all uh, the accessories, or say paraphernalia, which is sensors and data links, the reliance on them is as per the phases of the complete execution of the mission. I hope that explains the question's answer, how
Yes.
things work.
Absolutely. And I mean, just to follow up on this again, what is harder to align in the real joint operations? Doctrine, communications, or decision making timelines? I have a different perspective on this, but yeah, first you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this question is uh, it is a very organizational question,
Yeah.
other than being a technical question.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the reason I said, I have a different perspective on this.
Correct, correct. It's a
Yeah.
very tricky and very
Yeah.
difficult situation to handle. If someone who is the joint planner or coordinator, it is the most difficult
Yes.
job, rather than being a actual soldier carrying the weapon and fighting
That's
the
true.
enemy.
That's
It is the
true.
most difficult
That's
task
true.
to align uh, all the aims and targets. So when we're talking about joint operations, because there are multiple agencies involved, their uh, their doctrines are written differently, because their aims and their assessment, their objectives differ on their capability and the kind of tasking they have been given. So doctrinally they are separated completely, but then thanks to peacetime preparation, every country, or say any forces which is having their armed forces, they also prepare a joint doctrine on how joint operations would go through. So to start with, we have a basic layout of how joint operations will work. We do have a joint doctrine. Now second thing which comes is, say, communication or interaction between the leadership. Here the problem, now at doctrinal level, it is very simple, because once you have written, put things in pen and paper, or once you have put things in black and white, it is very explanatory that it ideally it should work this way. But from ideal things towards what on grounds is, things start getting complicated. The first place where things start becoming slightly complicated is the interaction or the communication level. At this level, the first challenges are terminologies, concepts. uh, like a very basic example I would give is a soldier, when he's passing coordinates of a particular target, his coordinate system or grid system would be different. He would pass in this grid and uh, decimals of coordinates. But a pilot who is actually dropping weapons, his area of operations is very large. His reach is very large. So he would definitely say in hundreds of nautical miles and this particular target and coordinates of this target. His coordinates would never be understood by a soldier who is fighting the battle in a battlefield. So communication problems start first with the terminologies, understanding your operation systems. So here again, uh, it all depends on what kind of finesse you have achieved, or how intricate your joint doctrine has been written. So if your joint doctrine has been written in a very deliberate and very extensive manner, considering every last problem that could arise, every last problem that actually arose when you did practice or say exercises during peacetime, every small operation issue that arose during the peacetime operations was catered into that joint doctrine. If it is catered, then this communication starts smoothly, removing all the difficulties or smaller problems which would actually arise in a situation. That would smoothly be, that flow would smoothen out eventually. And still, hiccups in communication or interaction would still remain at expectation or execution level, slightly at a senior level, where the commanders of both sides, as and when the situation develops, uh, combat or say warfare being very dynamic in nature, situation would keep changing, and different scenarios would keep arising. So in this case, as and when the adverse situations start arising, here the communication, because both the commanders have their own expectations, their own different aims and objectives, here things start misaligning. But interaction between them would definitely improves communication and helps in problem solving. So in joint operation, the biggest hurdle in say interaction would definitely be communication would be solved by more and more interaction between the commanders. So for such
Yes.
cases, again from a military perspective, or say someone from who is building something or developing something for the armed forces, something which is a communication system which is set between a battlefield mobile battlefield to the headquarters and to the between commands, a very high speed linkage or interact communications. Once it is set up, it becomes easy for the commander sitting at all levels to interact between them. So if you have a communication system which would allow an Air Force commander to speak to Army commander as well as a sub commander who is at a battlefield level in the Army, if they are interacting
Yes.
in real time, it would help three of them to understand each other, and
Yeah.
also understand each other's limitations, and also understand each other's requirements. Like for example,
Yes.
I can give the very interesting example is from Border movie, where Sunny Deol is speaking to Jackie
Yeah.
Shroff and telling you that we cannot fly by night.
Yes.
But vis-a-vis, here Jackie Shroff is also worried that my troops, because he's considering them as friends and he has to support them, he's understanding that they are fighting for their life throughout the night. So the first light he has to
Yes.
get airborne and engage the targets. This was because
Yes.
at least they could talk on a radio set or a telephone. This interaction has helped both of them to understand each other's limitation as well as each other's requirements. So communication, the gaps in communication are a big challenge, but smoothly building, and for any company who is working to develop something, a real-time
Yes.
interaction or communication system which would align as much as people as much possible in a grid would definitely help in resolving. Now, the third
Yeah.
point that you told me was about decision making. So when we talk about decision
Yes.
making, again, if the doctrine has been written very well, they would understand in this particular scenario, um, and such particular scenarios who would be taking the decision and what kind of aims and objectives that we are looking to achieve, and depending on those objectives, how we are going to go ahead with the authority. So who authority for one
Yes.
particular scenario, who holds the authority to take decisions. So clear demarcation of authority, and again communication upwards, because now we spoke about communication downwards, it up to the sub commander level, to the from the higher onwards to this down to the sub commander, where he is actually engaged in battlefield, he is able to speak to the commander. Now from commander
Yes.
onwards, as much flexibility he understand has to speak upwards to the higher say generals and air marshals in sitting in the headquarter. Now because now this decision making going, this interaction smoothly flowing between the highest level to the lowest level will help in, because the person who is sitting at the highest level has more number of inputs to him. He knows more
Yes.
of the things, a particular, he's maybe he's seeing more than one area of operations in a larger, maybe he's seeing operations at pan India level, and he knows that something has been achieved in another theater of war, so we need to realign our objectives in this theater. So a commander who is sitting at a very higher level has more visibility into the operations, but that would not be case in a very sub commander or a commander who is at a very battlefield level, who is not having visibility into the other theaters. For him, his objective would be priority, but for commander who is sitting at a very high level would reassign the objectives and reassign the priority from this theater to this theater. Now here input sensors, different sensor which would give the senior leader higher number of inputs and give him very high amount of information, while as the real time war is progressing, real time data is available to him, his decision making improves. And again, coming back to this communication lines, wherein he is able to relay as fast as possible his thought process, or say or his decision towards the lowest commander who is actually fighting the battle. This interaction, or say passing of new objectives, changed objectives, and reassessment of situation, once it is passed, this real time operation, because it is a cycle, it is not a linear process, it is a cyclic process. Goes to the field, again comes feedback, comes again, it goes. And this, when this cycle is as fast as possible, this would help in aligning real-time joint operations. I think that is
Wonderfully put, actually. Wonderfully put it. I think uh, you mentioned about all this aspect in such a detailed way. I just wanted to add one perspective over there. So there are some countries where I think the external interference always happens in the joint operations, especially from the political side, and I think that messes up the operations a lot. And I mean, like, I won't mention the name of the countries, and by the way, this is common all across the world. That's what I had observed. One of the, I think, instances where I had personally been engaged, I won't mention the name or of the place or the country, anything. But one thing that happens is like you need a free hand in certain basically areas
correct.
in a hostile territory. I think the armed forces basically should take over. No one should. I mean, the special forces, armed forces together should take over. They should have a free hand. What happens is like when a political narrative comes into the play, it kind of also degrades the operation, but there is also a risk that you might end up losing some of your troops as well, just to save your political narrative in front of the geopolitical powers. So that is something a lot common, and I would say in Europe specifically, I would like to mention that, not targeting any specific country or as such, but there has been some instances, on a bureaucratic level. I mean, Ukraine, if we see on a broader level, Ukraine has been diplomatic failure for Europe. I mean, Europe was known for these many years, staying in close, I think, loop with Russia, even though NATO was created to counter Russia. Things change over time. The diplomacy was strong, but I think suddenly the diplomacy basically took a hit after the Ukraine. And because one of the reason was, I mean, these two are a bit of a different thing, diplomacy and the joint operation. But what I'm trying to say, when a political interference is high, you end up basically draining out your own missions. And that's what even happens in the joint operations as well, the way it has happened here. So political interference is something that I feel shouldn't be there. But yeah, of course it depends on the country, location, and which system you are, and of course which ruling party is there in that specific democratic nation. Do you have anything to add over here,
Yes,
Shailesh?
definitely. Like, think, see, uh, when it is about political interference, now any commander of, say, who is leading the armed forces should also understand that it is not only his war; it is the nation's war.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that commander, say, during peacetime, we should also train certain liaison officers who would explain the real time scenario, explain the objectives, and explain how things are progressing to the political and the national level, to the civilian, to the last civilian person. So this, at this point, say, as the battle progresses, also certain media briefing to the politicians. Now, briefing to the politician in not in military terminology, a terminology which the political leader would understand, because he's not the military commander.
Sorry to cut you here. Basically, you're trying to say to speak their language.
Correct.
The person should be able to speak their
It
language.
is
Yeah, I
not.
agree with you
It is
on this.
not only about
Exactly.
speaking their language. See, a
Yeah.
military commander understands his operations better, and he knows what achievement of what aims and what objectives would truly benefit the nation. But the political leader is not totally aligned with your objectives, aims, and objectives, and he would not understand why this particular objective is important. He would prioritize some other objective or some other task to be priority one. Now, to be able to explain him why this particular thing is important, so it is not only about speaking his language, it is about making him, it is also speaking his language. That is basic. You speak his language, then also make him realize the importance of your objective as also his objective or the nation's objective. If there is a stark difference wherein it totally conflicts with the national interest, in that case the political interference would be necessary. Say, for example, a military commander at one point thinks that maybe a nuclear weapon can be launched, but then the political leader would have a different opinion, and the completely nation and the citizens would have a different perspective. In this case, that political interference maybe would avoid a catastrophe. So this is a very peculiar example, but while normal operations, or say a war is breaking out wherein national interest is primary, so your territorial integrity or sovereignty is at stake. At this point, say, in a lot of scenarios, the military commander understands better on what objectives are to be given and what tasks are to be prioritized. Now it is not only about speaking the language of the politician, but it also making him realize why this is important. So you need very smart statesmen or people who understand politics very well among the military officers. So I would say those liaison officers who sit along with the political leader and explain him why these particular things are important. And once you have convinced the leader, he's also show him, at times you also should show him his how his benefit and how his leadership would be enhanced, how the nation would appreciate his decision making once this particular objective is achieved. Now that explanation, that realization
Yes.
of his participation also is convinced to him, he would definitely slowly start aligning with you, and would assist you. And also parallelly, say, peacetime organizational levels, say any political level, or at a parliamentary or national level, how have you engaged or built your
Yes.
organizations wherein the interaction between military leaders and politicians is happening. Say, for example, if a war is broken out, and within the war room at your national capital, which all political leaders as well as military leaders are sitting together and discussing on what is to be done. If it is only the generals sit and talk and decide, of course there would be political interference because you have not involved them on the table.
Yes.
So it is not only about one particular, say, president of the nation or the prime minister of the nation, but also head of different ministries, right from the transport ministry to economics to defense, inland defense, state
Yes.
governors, and I'm giving generic examples, not very country specific, but
Yeah.
Leadership going further downwards, who would actually be even be affected? See,
True.
I'll give a very small and very interesting examples. Even if you add someone who is, say, irrigation minister, if you add, you might not, you would think how irrelevant is to add an irrigation minister, but from army perspective, once operations start, it is very important to control your canals. The water flow in canals can change a battlefield scenario. Say enemy troops are crossing the canal. At one point, you stop the water, and at one point, when they are crossing, you release the water. It will make the things difficult for the enemy forces to cross one particular canal. Or say you change the course of water, or also explain him that if enemy bombs your particular canal head or waterworks where you're controlling the flow of canal, how would you go about making their backups and standbys, and because your one system of operation is failed,
Yes.
now also involving him, that is, of course, at this point the information sharing is has to be need to know basis, but also explaining that particular person his importance in the war would definitely align him into the joint objective of the nation, what the commander, where the commander is thinking and how the command things are going. So this is a very peculiar example. You say that person who controls the water supply or canal is also to be catered in your planning process, or say
Yes.
real time war room, and explaining him that what his role is. So it is again at organization level. How during peacetime have you built your organizational setup? Who makes and
Yeah.
decisions and discusses these points? I want
Excellent
to keep
articulation,
this
Shailesh.
understood to you.
Loved this. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's what I said. Excellent articulation, because I think this was necessary. The way you basically mentioned the kind of, it's not only political, of course,
Correct.
what I mentioned about, but it also involves the civilians as well, depending on the kind of location, geography, and the
Correct.
kind of task that is going to be executed. I agree with you on this. Wonderful insight. And proceeding ahead, more from, I would say, uh, the control point of view. So, who truly controls the air in army-led campaign, and how do interoperable army, navy, air force weapon systems and counter non-conventional threats determine whether joint operations succeed or fail? Of course, no one knows whether it's going to succeed or fail. We go in with full force, but yeah, from your experience, you can basically answer this question.
So, in an army-led campaign, wherein say I consider that army-led, say I am considering at core level, where a core is engaged in operations, and there in their AOR, uh, say particular, they have particular objectives or particular tasks. So but in this AOR, the core at core level also they do have some assets which control air. Say they do have surface to air missiles, or say helicopters which support them. But at Air Force level, the control of airspace over that AOR, where the complete core is spread out, is still with the Air Force, but definitely not at a very higher level. But say at Air Force level, what would have ideally be done is one particular Air Force commander with, say, a person who controls aerial assets has been allotted specifically to this particular AOR, and who's taking particular decisions with respect to this particular army-led operation. So, Air Force is to assign particular a sub commander who would take decisions in this particular box, wherein the that core is operating. The complete authority would be given to that sub Air Force commander in terms of aerial assets. So, how aerial assets would progress to operate, because see the core needs to be aware of what is flying over them. It is a friendly aircraft or an enemy aircraft or an asset, even if it is an helicopter. The core should not end up shooting their own. A fratricide is a very unfortunate thing that would happen at in the very friendly territory itself. So here, clear demarcation, identification of the targets, and allotment of targets on what to is to be engaged and what not to be engaged. So here, it is an army-led campaign is a very at core level is a very peculiar example of joint operations. So here, any aerial asset, say army has surface to air missiles and helicopters, their control, that is their allotment, their authority on what height they will fly, where they will fly, when they will stop flying, and information to these targets, like when they are free to shoot, when the army air defense system, when are they free to shoot, because the radar and the air force commander knows now there is no friendly, and anything that is coming is any platform or any threat which is coming is enemy, and they are clear to engage. So here the complete control over air defense assets is exercised by the air force commander who is allotted to that particular area. However, whatever aerial assets are engaged in, so there would be air force helicopter or air force fighter planes who are engaging weapons or engaging targets in a in a particular in a particular fashion against the army. But here the allotment of target is purely dependent on the army commander. Now the army commander would take decision on what is to be engaged and what is not. So this is a particular,
Interesting.
a very particular joint control, cross control, I would say, because air defense assets control of air is exercised by Air Force, but the allotment of targets of the Air Force task allotment is done by the Army commander. There is, of course, there is a liaison
Yes.
officer with the Army commander who is an Air Force officer who would advise him. Who would There would definitely be an advisor who would advise him on how to go about understanding of the systems. Now, out of fancy, he cannot say keep put 1,000 bombs on one particular target just to destroy them. Then Air Force advisor would advise him, that commander, that to engage this particular target, this much bombs would be required. You just tell
Yes.
us the authority on, if say particular this target is to be engaged as per your importance, the importance in the battle. Then the Air Force advisor through him would convey the tasking to the aerial assets or the assets of the Air Force, and then the Air Force assets would go
Yes.
and engage them. So authority over engagement of targets, prioritization of target would be with the army commander, but in the progressing battlefield, control of the situation would be with the Air Force, because we don't want an army Jawan who is carrying a manpad to be shooting down friendly helicopter which is flying carrying our own troops into the field. So here,
Yes.
that cross connection is very important for success of the battlefield.
Absolutely. I think the mutual coordination between the synchronization between the forces is very important, I would say. That's true. And I would say we are at the final part of the episode now. Um, so, I mean, this question again, Shailesh, please feel free to remove any confidentiality. And if you feel that you can keep this answer brief, then please keep it brief. Up to you, as per your comfort zone to answer this. So as India moves, towards the joint commands, what types of weapons will become more critical, and which legacy preferences may become less relevant, especially given the situation of our neighborhood at the moment?
So, with progress of joint commands, we have already seen one a very live demo of how joint operations went through. Because
Yes.
see, uh, going with the information which is available on open source about the previous two conflicts that have occurred in our neighborhood, that is, say, during Operation Balakot, that was in 2019, and now Operation Sindoor, which recently took place. You would see there is a marked shift between the forces that were involved. You would, if you remember, it was purely an air force operation during Balakot, but now
Yes.
when Operation Sindoor took place, the operation was completely a joint operation. You had Navy doing their part, also Army engaging their part of targets allotted to them, and also Air Force parallelly operating. Though the distribution of tasking and engagement would be different between the services, but you would see even the press statement which was released, it was given by all three forces. In nowhere there was no force was operating in isolation. everything was joint, and most of the targets were jointly controlled. So, so when we talk about joint commands coming in here, the kind of weapons that will become more critical are one which engage uh, precision targets. Say, for example, in this case, the surface to surface missiles or long range air to ground missiles, which were launched by also by Air Force, but also Army also had their own kind of aerial airborne weapons, and also Navy was prepared to engage particular targets. So they do, all the three forces, they do have their weapon systems, but their interoperability also would start becoming relevant as time progresses, as these operations, if unfortunately if they take place often, very oftenly, and they keep happening, such situations keep happening in future, their interoperability, inter usage would start becoming a more important aspect. I'll give you a very particular example or very peculiar example that took place. This is very open source, and I can we can discuss this particular example in very open. Like, the entire world, through all the data available in open source, was aware that there were a lot of swarm drones which were flying in through the enemy side, in the neighborhood, through the Pakistani side towards the Indian bases. So Indian air bases were overwhelmed. The air defense systems were overwhelmed with swarm drones. But on our side, on the Indian Air Force side, now here it there was a very decisional dilemma, that whether to engage these swarm drones, because it was very uneconomic, or the cost of engaging them was very high. You cannot engage a very costly missile to shoot down a very cheap drone. It was, the economy of effort was not suitable. But in this case, the army had been maintaining those vintage anti-aircraft guns. Now, those guns were the perfect system to engage these swarm drones. So, most of the places where the army air defense guns were assisting the air force systems, or they were protecting the air force bases, they engaged these small scale swarm drones, and the accuracy was very high. Now, because you were not firing a very costly missile, it was done with those air to ground to air uh, guns, air defense guns. So this particular example is very relevant of how warfare is changing and how things are progressing. In, like, in joint commands, interoperability of your systems as and when situation progresses, because the nature of warfare is becoming very dynamic and things are developing very fast. Technology is changing. The kind of threats that are emerging are very dynamic. We even can't understand what kind of threats would assess in the next next conflict. But here, say something which is related to the network centric domain, here the air force would have made more progress. The air force would assist the army, but in something like protecting the through the swarm drones, using of anti-aircraft guns, which has been traditionally been maintained by the army for very long time, are again used by the air force as an platform to engage particular type of threat. So this is a particular example, and I think there's nothing better to explain how joint operations and joint commands would see things in future. Correct. Um, so now what I see through my interaction with the industry players is something that they have been very particularly underestimating is the kind of uh, support systems that they're or say data systems that they're trying to build. What I mean to say is, when the industry players, what they are looking at is they're only looking a weapon specific or a platform specific output. The industry would say make a particular drone or a particular weapon system which they expect to be uh, sold or say inducted by the armed forces and usage for them. But here the problem is the industry player is not understanding what exactly is the requirement of the armed forces. See, one particular weapon system, if it has been purchased, he is not envisaging to keep purchasing newer weapon systems again and again, because again budgets are also constrained, and also training the troops, allotment of assets, planning, putting things on paper, managing those assets is a very lengthy process. So if one particular system is purchased or inducted by the armed forces, be it anyone, by the armed forces, if one of the systems is inducted or purchased from you, you should not be looking to buying the same thing again until and unless you have to increase the numbers or say there is an upgrade within the next 5 to 10 years. There would not be an follow-up order immediately until and unless it is an inventory requirement. So now other industry players, if you're trying to build the same platform, say for example a drone which can drop a weapon. Now if the armed forces have purchased from one, say one of the available products in the market, now other companies trying to build the same platform or same system would not help, because you would end up not contributing to the fact to this process. Rather, the industry player, what they should do is understand that what are the existing gaps in the armed forces. Say, for example, network centric warfare, electronic warfare, there are support systems, there are data cycles that have to happen within the electronic warfare cycle. So, whatever, as you see, as and when war progresses, there is a lot of electronic data which is flowing in the battlefield, which has to be caught, which has to be catched, and which has to be analyzed, and which has again to go back in updating the threat libraries of the forces. Now, this is a very important cycle of electronic warfare, that whatever electronic data is available has to be processed and again put back into the system as updation of threat library. So people are not, the industry is not working in these finer gaps which are existing in the system. The armed forces definitely know that these are there, but the industry has to wait for someone from the field has to come and explain them, yeah, this is the existing gap, please develop something which would work in this particular domain. So these smaller gaps, once the industry is starting will start filling up, then in this particular scenario the complete system will start developing, and then you would
Yes.
eventually realize and where are the existing gaps, and the industry will smoothly start growing, because now not everyone is making the same weapon. So there would be a diversity in the development of whatever systems are there. So to summarize, what I would like to say is the industry is underestimating the the existing gaps which are there in the armed forces. Whatever systemic gaps or technological gaps they are all are existing, they are not uh, they are not aware of the gaps. That is the first thing. There's no one to tell them on what to work on, and they should understand if jointly, if everyone is trying to make the same type of weapon or same type of platform, then they would only one of them would achieve achieve a success by that. Armed forces would induct their weapon system, and others would eventually fail, because if you have committed a lot of budgets to that particular development, then your budget would go waste. So my summary to this is that every industry should interact with those veterans who have been part of where I come in. That is why I have chosen this. What I feel is this is the exact existing gap, that the industry players don't know where are the gaps, and what development and what areas or what products will exactly go and fit in what is existing requirements are already there. And once you have developed that, that would definitely go and fit in, and eventually in this process, once you start filling the gaps, the industry as a complete aerospace and defense industry as in complete setup in any particular country would start growing.
Definitely. And I think I would like to add cyber and space as well into that,
Definitely.
because that is becoming a integral part of it. I definitely agree with you on this final, point that we discussed, Shailesh, that at the end, it's about supply and demand.
Yeah.
Understanding the demand at a niche level, it's extremely important,
Correct.
because
And
and I won't just, I would say, uh, mention the fact that we don't have the startups in the world working on such a latest technology, but this has been an extreme level problem, especially from my personal experience working on an international platform
correct.
across different 30 different countries, armed forces. The one country that I always found smooth working on a corporate level, commercial level for the armed forces is the United States,
Yes.
because the induction of the technologies over there is specific to the needs of the armed forces. And one of the important thing, I mean, we were
Correct.
speaking about, doing the kind of good things for the nation, in favor of the nation, not whether it's a politician or whether it's an armed forces personnel. I believe the investors, private investors, or the people who are funding these startups need to believe in some of the latest technology and the demand missions that are basically coming up, both in Europe, India, and other parts of the world, except the United States, because the United States really understands this very well. Because, of course, the evolution of that ecosystem is at a next level. I mean, I would like just to give an example. There have been several companies, including I think Paytm. Basically, no one believed in them when they started, and the Chinese investors were the first one actually believed in, initially, at that level. Maybe it's even if it's a quick commerce or kind of fintech companies. And then people were shouting in India that how the Chinese investors money is flowing. I mean, like, it's because the Indian investor didn't believe in their own startups in this
Right.
country. And I think this is lot missing, not only in India but even in Europe, by the way, that if you bring up something new, people are good enough to question it, trash it out. But the moment something works out, now I'll give you an example. When I was in India until 2016, I had to beg to the publications to publish about the military satellites. It was so crucial that 2611 could have been stopped if India had resilient space capabilities back then, because I think after 7 o'clock the terrestrial communications for the Indian Navy is off, and unfortunately the Indian Navy couldn't track at that time. And I was desperately, writing. Curiosity was there, but the willingness, of the people was not there. And suddenly, I think through space, whom I know from Hyderabad since long time, they're I think one of the first companies who received a kind of a good amount of funding in the upstream space and satellite technologies. From there, the hype started. Now, everyone in India is not investing in the space technology because it's for the benefit of the nation. They're investing because it looks good on portfolio. So I think this really needs to change. If you
Correct.
really want to stay ahead of the curve in terms of, weapon systems, technology, and for the good of the nations, firstly, I think the motive and the intention needs to change a lot in the corporate sector, which I do not really align. Both in Europe and India, it's the same situation, unfortunately.
Correct.
So I hope the policymakers are taking this into consideration, but I hope that this materializes well in the corporate sector as well,
Definitely.
because at the end, the intention matters a lot. And without the intention, I think you won't be having a long term vision. I mean, we have several companies operating in India, but I don't think so there is a brand that has came out of India. I mean, Lockheed Martin is a brand, Boeing
Correct.
is a brand, Airbus is a brand, Thales is a brand. We need such kind of thing, because it is also a positioning that gives you an as an authority level validation on a global scale.
Correct.
Of course, no country needs a validation when you are in basically G20 level, seat over there. But in terms of, brand validation is important, so that your voice is heard in the market on a global scale. So that's what I wanted to add basically onto what you
I think
mentioned,
you have very
on a
openly called
broader
it
scale.
out what I was afraid. You have very openly called out what I was very afraid to
Yeah.
say. Maybe it would not.
Yes.
I was not aware whether it would be appropriate for this podcast. That
Yeah.
you said this, that people do things because it looks good on the portfolio, like space
Yes.
domain. Now you're working in this space domain, you would understand that if it has to be very fancy and it looks good on portfolio, say sending someone in the space or getting someone putting a
Yeah.
satellite in the space would always look fancy. But something like developing, say, a launch pad for the satellite, or say I would work on this particular aspect, which is very niche and which would not give
Yes.
me so much of limelight, but still it is a very there is an existing gap, and there's very much a requirement to work on that field. People would still skip that and go on the fancier things. Now that is that is something that, again, the last question that I was answered, that the industry is still underestimating the existing gaps and the niche areas where still they have to work.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think
definitely. I think
there is this is
I'm
the
great that we are aligned on this.
Yes, correct. And this is where I
Yeah.
think we both come into play,
Yeah.
that we would, I think, those people who, those industries who need such kind of guidance, we need to consult them, advise them of existing gaps wherein they were working there would give them a very big boost, and they would grow themselves into the in this aerospace and defense domain.
Absolutely. Yeah. Perfect. I think that was a great conversation, Shailesh. A
Definitely
lot of great insights. I believe we did miss out on some of the land warfare and the air warfare systems, but that, as I said, it's a different topic. Would love to
correct.
actually record few more episodes with you, which I'm going to record for sure. Absolutely, in the coming weeks. Thank you very much again for the insights, and we hope
Thank you.
you all the best for the future ventures and adventures, and for your contribution as well to the nation that you have done till today. As well as, I believe, in the coming years, we might see you basically integrating into the more, I would say, on the back end side of the
Yes,
defense system.
correct.
And I hope to work with you as well. I think we have been speaking about this, about some engagements with our company. So definitely, proceeding ahead, I would love to work with you, and let's keep in touch for the
Definitely.
future episodes.
I'm very
Thank
thankful
you.
to you to give this platform to interact with you and also express my ideas, the knowledge that I have, and share it with you, so that through you and through your platform it gets shared to a lot of people. People understand what how things are, and I'm very thankful to you. Thank you so much, and looking forward for in future many more interactions in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Have a good day. Bye.
Same here. Thank you.